today I've got something pretty interesting for you guys. I've been fishing crankbaits, basically my whole life. I've been fishing diving plugs my whole life, but about 5 years ago I started using a bait caster, and I started out with a medium action, and I threw everything on that thing. Whether it was frogs or jigs or crankbaits, whatever. But now I've finally got myself a technique specific crankbait rod. That's a Kevin Van Dam Signature Series rod by Quantum. And this rod right here, it's great, especially for throwing shallow diving crankbaits like square bill crankbaits. You see, it's got a moderate action. Okay, what that means is that it's got a little bit more whip in it, and what that allows you to do is you can fish this around all sorts of rocks, and you can fish your crankbait around wood and all sorts of different hard cover and all sorts of structure, and you can bounce it off the cover. I'm not saying you can just reel it really quickly through a whole pile of sticks and not expect to get hung up with a square bill end with this rod, but if you know what you're doing, you can throw it into the cover. You can use the lip of the bait to bounce it off the cover, and this softer rod is going to allow you to deflect the bait off of it and allow it to rise back up. Ever since Strike King came out with a Kevin Van Dam 1.5 and 2.5 square bills, especially the silent ones, everybody's been talking about them. Everybody's been talking about square bill baits, and the truth is, a lot of people think they're some sort of new innovation to the crankbait fishing game, and really they're not. Square bill crankbait was probably the first crankbait ever invented. It's a very basic design, doesn't dive very deep, and one thing that's great about it is it has a lot of the Kevin Van Dam, the Strike King square bills. They have this searching action when you reel them really fast, and if you give them, if you pop them almost even like a jerkbait every once in a while, they'll turn over to the side and show flashes at the side, and it makes it look like an injured bait fish. You can get them in the rattling models or the non-rattling models. If you're fishing tough conditions, cold water, inactive fish, you might want to use the non-rattling models, especially the 1.0, the really small Kevin Van Dam crankbait. I've found that sometimes on cold days or days when the fish won't hit anything else, they'll hit nothing else but a little crankbait with no rattles that looks like a bluegill, that Kevin Van Dam 1.0. This rod here is a composite rod. It's made of fiberglass as well as graphite. The graphite is going to give you some sensitivity. Okay, in the past, in the old days, guys would just use a glass rod, and the reason for that is they have a parabolic action. They'll bend through the entire rod. The reason you want that is because when you're using treble hooks, if you use a stiffer rod, a lot of guys have a tendency, like myself, to really just lean on those fish because you're used to fishing a jig or a Texas rig, something with just a big single hook on the end, and all you're trying to do when you're fishing a bait like that is get that hook through the fish's mouth. With a crankbait, you're going to end up ripping the hooks out of the thing's mouth. And if you're new to them and that happens to you, you're going to be thinking, well, it just doesn't make sense. I can set the hook perfectly with a bait that's got a single hook, but with these treble hook baits, I just can't keep the hooks in them. The reason you want a softer rod is for a bunch of reasons. When that fish jumps, it's going to act just like a noodle rod when you're steelhead fishing. You're using small hooks, light line. It's going to absorb the shock from that fish jumping. It's going to follow that fish's jump. Okay, it's a lot more forgiving. You don't always have to be on that fish. Like if you're using a stiffer rod, you'd have to make sure you're keeping that fish down, keep it from jumping. With a rod like this, it doesn't matter as much. It still does, but this is a much more forgiving rod. Number two, like I said, when you're deflecting off structure, with a stiffer rod, you're going to get that bait stuck in between the rocks. That bait's going along. You hit a rock with a stiff rod, it's going to get stuck. If you keep reeling, you're just going to get it stuck there. You're going to try and pull it out. It's not going to go. With with a rod that's sensitive enough and whippy enough, you'll feel it, and just as you feel it, you can allow that bait to bounce off it, float up, and then continue fishing. It's a 7'4" rod, and it's ideal for shallow run crankbaits, like the KVD 1.0s through the 2.5 series. All the Kevin Van Dam square bill baits are great on this rod. Not just because it's a Kevin Van Dam rod, okay? It's just the perfect rod. It's the perfect length, the perfect. It's got sensitivity, the perfect bend. It's got everything, okay? It's got semi-micro guides, which are going to allow you to make much more accurate and farther casts. At first, when I heard that, I really didn't believe it. I didn't think, well, what's it going to matter? They're a little bit smaller, but you know what? It really does help. They're going to be, the line's going through a much smaller space, so you can make a much more accurate and longer cast. There's less resistance. So other reasons you want to use a softer rod: your hook point pressure, your hook setting pressure and the hook point pressure when you're fighting the fish is spread out between anywhere, from 6 to 9 hook points. And they're small hooks, they're sharp hooks, but it can be a lot harder to keep them in the fish if you're using a stiffer rod, because if you're really pulling on them, those hooks will rip out. And with a softer rod, it's cushioning those hooks in there. It's keeping the hooks in them. Your goal isn't just to rip the hooks and get it right through the fish's mouth. Okay, your goal is to set the hook, get the hook in the fish's mouth, and keep it there. You can't horse a fish with a crankbait rod, or with just a crankbait in general. And with a much more forgiving rod, it's going to allow you to be a much better crankbait fisherman. It's got the Fuji components, really nice Fuji reel seat here, split grip, makes it lighter. I mean, I like casting with a full cork composite or foam grip, but makes it lighter. My hands are a little bit too big for this down here, but the casting is still excellent on the thing. Designed for 12 to 25 pound test, 3/8 to 1 ounce lure weight. It's an awesome rod. It's a super versatile rod because it's got the whip, or versatile crankbait rod. You can use it for deep divers or shallow divers because it's got the whip in the tip, but it's got the backbone when you get down to it. 7'4" Kevin Van Dam Signature Series crankbait rod by Quantum. It's a $69 rod. I got it at Bass Pro Shops. I think they regularly go for 90 bucks, something like that. So it's a pretty cheap rod. It's just about the cheapest good quality crankbait rod I could find. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate you watching the video. If you'd like to subscribe, you can go right up here and subscribe. You can head over to the main channel. And yeah, I really appreciate you watching. I really wanted to share this rod with you because I think it's such an awesome rod, especially when you're fishing around hardcover, not weeds. If you're fishing around weeds, you need a little stiffer rod, but we can get into all that later. This is an awesome rod by Quantum, and if you buy it, I'm not sponsored by them. I'm not being paid to show this. If you use this rod, you buy it and you use it with shallow run crankbaits or deep diving crankbaits, I'm sure you're really going to like it.